Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. It's my pleasure today and my privilege to introduce our speaker. Today, we are going to find out what happened during the 2018 elections. Mike Noble is the chief pollster and managing partner of OH Predictive Insights, which is a Phoenix-based research and polling company. His career began at MBQF Consulting, and it's a consulting firm which he founded at just 25 years of age. Known as the top pollster in Arizona, Mike is a nationally acclaimed public affairs, political, and corporate researcher. In the past 2 years, Mike has been nationally cited in over 400 articles, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Huffington Post, among many others. He's a trailblazer in research field and a force in public opinion. Please give a big Rotary welcome to Mike Noble.
It is truly an honor and a privilege to be standing up here today because the Phoenix Rotary was established back in 1914 when Phoenix only was 15,000 residents. Now Phoenix is the fifth largest city in the country. So anyways, incredible privilege to be here. So I have prepared something special just for all of you of wondering what the heck just happened in that election, right? Well, so we're going to start off kind of going from a top view, but first off, before we go into that, real briefly, besides some of the stuff they said, OH Predictive Insights, we're a strategic research firm, so it's not just handing you data. Anyone can do that. It's knowing and partnering with our clients, figuring out what their goals, or what are the problems they're trying to solve. Are you trying to get a bond initiative passed? Are you trying to figure out who your market is of selling your product, or are you trying to get more engagement with your employees in your organization? So by partnering, we know what you're trying to accomplish, but how that data affects, and you can make better decisions, frankly, to have a better success rate, but also prevent stepping on landmines. We don't like stepping on landmines. So, and for us, we've been, just in the last year, I think we did over $4 million in earned media values. And I did a lot of interviews. Literally, I think about half my time is not even doing research, is just literally talking about the research. We're trying to make it digestible, because if you throw a bunch of numbers at folks, it doesn't work. The question is, can you get that message across? We're going to start at a 5,000-foot national level, and then we'll work our way down. I also do want to touch always on the whole polling factor, because there are some questions of, how credible polling is, how predictive of an indicator it is, and then of course getting Arizona takeaways, but then predictions for 2020, and then I believe we'll have time for some questions at the end. So jumping right in, what were some of the national trends or records broken that we saw here in Arizona? So I think there's two main factors. I think one is for predicting elections. One is polling, what that public sentiment is. But of course, numbers just don't move, in my opinion. If you do good polling, the numbers, it's what the candidates' messages are, how much they're spending, and through what medians. So one of the biggest things that move the needle is TV or radio still, broadcast. And so when you look at, here's a quick chart, $5.2 billion was spent nationwide in these areas. $129 million spent in Arizona alone, and this doesn't even count paying for the staff and all that other fun stuff. So $120 million, which is a record for Arizona, and then we have kind of a chart of where we rank state-wise compared to others. Florida, of course, was the biggest takeaway, or the most money spent, with $473 million. But of course, Florida is a pivotal state when it comes to the battleground on the presidential map. So these are some other really fascinating. So nationwide, the voter is becoming more reflective of the nation. So looking just at Hispanics, for example, Hispanics right now, we saw a big uptick. So we had 11% turnout in this past midterm election. And when you look at this election, Hispanics right now in the census, back in 2010, which there was only 6.8% turnout, we had roughly 16% Hispanics of our population. Now, based on the 2015 census, we were at 17.6%, and now we're up to 11% on turnout. So again, the turnout, or the folks participating in the election, is becoming more reflective of our actual population. Also, women make up roughly half of our total population. However, probably underrepresented in the federal officers, some elected positions. We saw a huge surge, almost double than any other prior election year, of women candidates for either U.S. House or U.S. Senate. So when you look at, it was 529 women stepped up to vote. So we saw a lot more engagement because you can't win if you don't play. So that was a great takeaway we saw. This is a fun one. When you look at this next, turnout among eligible voters, 49.2%. So it's the highest turnout we've seen since 1914. And you see the two highest peaks in here elections because things just don't happen. So you had 1914 and 1966, where it's 50% and roughly 49% respectively. And so what were the two major events you saw then? 1914, World War I. 1966, Vietnam War. 2018, Trump, social movements, I would say. And so it was incredibly interesting to see the turnout of what we saw in the midterms, which is typically much lower. And one of the other trends is like where it goes. So this is a great chart that shows of how presidential approval rating will affect one's outcomes. So you see, for example, on the right side, folks with some of the higher ratings, Clinton and Reagan and several of the Bushes. But on down to the left, you see Trump is the second one. We highlighted him in yellow. He was at a 40% job approval rating. And so they had, it's 38 on there, but I think it was roughly around 40 seats of seats lost, and the chamber was also lost as well. So it's a great way to show that, depending on, even though they're not on the ticket, clearly the president or the head of the party has a huge impact on the bottom of the ticket. So that's what we also saw on some of these other trends. This is probably the best chart I have seen that really shows the dynamics of this election. And this one was that, Democrats grew more dominant in the suburbs for this 2018. So you look at, based on geography, so based on urban density, so you have your rural districts on the left, and you start blending down into your suburban, and then ultimately on the right side, your urban districts. As you can see, the GOP, clearly, their strength is in the rural suburban blended districts. However, once you get to sparse suburban, the third one and over, you can see Republicans didn't flip one seat, right? Democrats won all of those districts on over. So the problem is that few rural districts are left for Republicans to flip. So that's something that they should identify and probably realize that that might be a problem going forward, because many suburban districts were flipped by the Democrats. Why is that important? Because think about it, where is the largest growth sectors we're gonna see in election? How many people are saying, I wanna move to Cochise County, Apache County, or Yuma? Likely, they're most likely going to move to Maricopa County or Pima, where the jobs, the infrastructure, then also the education centers are. So this is something very interesting, and I think we're going to see playing out later moving forward. But suburbans voters were the swing voters that got Trump into office, however, kind of swung back the other way in this past election. So that's nationally. Now let's look at some of the facts about Arizona elections. So Arizona, what we had a record turnout for a midterm, so 65% turnout. That's crazy. 2.4 million people came out to vote of our 3.7 million registered voters. Plenty of them women. And so, but here's one of the most interesting facts is that we had 108,000 newly registered in 2018. That's more than double of the last midterm election. So we have seen now more engagement and more folks participating in the election process, because frankly, midterm elections in Arizona were pretty predictable prior to this one, because it was truly the same folks that came out and voted. If you voted in the last midterms, you're probably the same ones, but you really didn't have newer, especially younger voters coming out and voting. So, but this year, much different. And again, politics and public affairs is changing, whether we like it or not, but these are the trends that we're seeing in the data. And when you look at what's important on, let's say, a statewide level, a lot of this is probably very common, but just to reinforce, statewide, Maricopa County, of those 2.4 million votes, 1.3 million came from Maricopa County. So roughly on any given election, 6 out of 10 voters come out of Maricopa County. So statewide, Maricopa is incredibly important. But then, of course, the rural counties, which is, 15 counties in Arizona, the other 13, basically we combine up into rural, is 560,000 votes. So that was very interesting to see. I got some trivia for you. Does anyone know who the last Democratic U.S. Senator was in Arizona? Wow, dang. I thought it was going to be a hardball. Clearly, softball. This is a smart group. All right, you got it. Congrats. So Dennis Niconcini. So Arizona, why that's important. Arizona, prior to this election, every statewide office was held by a Republican. Also, on the House and the Senate were Republican controlled. And so it's been a while since Democrats have actually won the U.S. Senate seat here, as we saw in this election. So again, and the first female senator elected in Arizona's history. So again, very historic and a very groundbreaking election. So this one is fun. I just like to address it because, and this is the reason why. So I got married back in February, and my mother-in-law, she's your typical conservative Cave Creek Republican, and she flat out tells me, she goes, I don't believe polling, I think it's fake. I go, you know your son-in-law is not only a national pollster, but a really good one. Frankly, the last election in 2016, your pollsters got it wrong. We were 8 for 8 on elections called, including the primary and the general election. Also, Arizona's 8th special election, which was incredibly tough to call. We ended up calling that one. And then also recently in this election for governor and Senate, called both of those all within the margin of error. So again, I don't agree, but to show kind of how polling is predictive, and it's not fake, is that, so let's use the Arizona Senate as an example. So we had polled the Friday and Saturday prior to the election. And what our poll showed is that we had McSally +1. And people were like, oh, she's going to win by 1. I go, no, there is a margin of error, because one thing we cannot control, because polling is a snapshot in time. What I can't do is control the energy and the boots on the ground. And clearly Democrats were more motivated this year coming out to vote, because we saw the last few days of early voting, the Democrats had their best days of returns. So again, those are some of those moving factors. So how it landed up falling out, it was 50 to 48. So frankly, we were 3 points off, but again, well within the margin. So a good point. And then in the governor's race, same thing. 57-39 came out to 56-42, again within the margin. So polling can be incredibly predictive, and it's not fake, I swear. And this is something interesting, because I wanted to highlight this, because think about it. Arizona does not have national representation when it comes to public opinion. It's typically folks like Trafalgar Group, New York Times, NBC, Marist, Rasmussen, Fox News, Emerson, CNN, CBS, and YouGov. Well, Arizona now, so this is kind of a chart that shows Arizona Senate race polling of accuracy. So how far everybody was off on the margin of on Sinema, then of course on McSally. And so of these top 10s, all pretty big names, right? We've only been around 2.5 years. We got third out of 10, so third place. So we're incredibly proud of that, but of course, room for improvement, but these are all heavy hitters, but I think it's something incredibly proud that Arizona now does have a national accurate public opinion research group. So I thought that was great. So trends in Arizona, what happened? So when we look at some of these other trends, before going into it, I just want to play out, there's 2 big trends that happened. I think one was Trump, but I'm going to show you why Trump was a downtick. And we came out, at least back in November of actually 2017, of dangerous slopes ahead for the GOP. And we did actually 3 press releases on it. Finally, the third one, a month or so before the election, did they finally heed the problem that we have been literally seeing all year in the data. I could show you 50 surveys that all show the same thing. But when you look at the general election ideology breakdown, why is it important? Because a lot of people look at just how many Republicans, Democrats, Independents. Well, independents, they're not really independent. That is a false positive. They are disinfected Democrats. They're disinfected Republicans. They don't want to be aligned with a party, single issue voters. So you have a very interesting group. So when you look at this spread, how does that look for Arizona? 50% is conservative, right? And then 35% are the moderates in the blue. And then those true actual moderates. They don't lean one way or the other, 15%. And the reason why you have these Republican majorities here is that they typically, those moderates would swing towards the Republicans. However, this year is different, and I'll show you why. Is that looking at just the comparison, so you look at these two charts. So you have the ideology. So you look at this ideology, so that same spectrum look at. You got your very conservative on the left, going down to your true moderates in the middle, and then your liberals on the right. So when you look at the generic ballot compared to, so vote for a Republican, Democrat, but with no personalities or anything else injected, just straight on partisanship. Looking at Trump's approval, almost all those numbers are within the margin of error, but basically those moderates, they look exactly like liberals. They don't look like conservatives, and that was the problem this year. And so and also the intensity level of how strong those lean or somewhat liberals compared to the lean and somewhat conservatives. That's where you saw the issue. Because remember, there are more Republicans in this state. So again, that was one of the issues we knew with the election, but that's why you saw a lot of, I think, seats changing this year. The second biggest thing, issues, because it's not just what's going on nationally, there's also local issues. Local drives elections as well. One of the big things is what? Education and immigration. Top two right now. So when you look at these charts, would be important issue by ideology. So you have education in orange, and then you have immigration in green. It probably makes sense now. Why do you think in that primary election, every Republican was banging on the drum on immigration? Because you can see by issue priority, that's what it played to their base, right? However, it kind of hurt them for the general election because when you look at what was the most important issue for those key swing voters, those moderates, it wasn't immigration. That was way down the list. It was education. So again, those are some of the interesting trends we saw early on in the data, but that's why you saw changes like the superintendent of public instruction. I think the Democrat won that pretty handedly compared to the other statewide offices. But again, when they identified, I got a Republican, I got a Democrat. Voting on education, they're probably going to side with the Democrat because they're more identified with that specific issue. So now, there's a lot of races, everything else in the state is localized. I thought it was just easiest to focus on the two main ones, which is governor and Senate. I'm not going to spend too much time on governor because it wasn't really competitive, because I think Garcia was outspent 50-1 at one point. So again, money matters in elections as well. And so you look at just on the statewide overview, the governor's race on the left, Senate race on the right. Biggest thing, look at the depth in the colors. So clearly there was darker and more reds on the governor's side and lighter blues. There were more blues and less darker reds on the Senate side. And the biggest thing, where Phoenix is located right there, Maricopa County. Remember, 6 out of 10 voters come out of there. And so that was one of the big differences on the election. So, but where were those losses at? And when you jump over to, you guys have heard a lot of talk about it, but this is just a quick way to represent it. So this is just a zoomed in view of Maricopa County. But basically, if you look at the middle left almost of the map, you can see that's Ahwatukee. Ahwatukee, very suburban area, right? And you then have South Tempe, Chandler right over there. If you look at just glance over and see the color differences, the governor, he did fine or kind of broke even, but he did win over there. But with the Senate, totally different story. They had lost, the suburban voters weren't going with that. And that also goes to the point is that with the colors so not only were those suburban areas, South Tempe, Chandler, you have that west part of Mesa, but then also in the north in that Deer Valley, that Peoria area, again, a lot of the suburban areas here in Arizona. And so it was very fascinating to see is that I've heard certain people say that, oh, well, if whoever's the top of the ticket, the governor, that's going to help the GOP out. Voters are far smarter than that. And I will swear to that all day because, and this is a great way to prove it, is that, yes, for a local election, they probably viewed the governor as that, hey, he's doing a good job, he's pragmatic, he's going for the people, good steward of Arizona. Yeah, he's great. But when he looked at the Senate race, I think the big issue, Sinema went very early and right to the middle right in the middle of putting herself as a moderate. She didn't really jump on any partisan issues and really talked about being for all of Arizona compared to McSally, who hugged Trump in the primary election, which, remember, she was only up 6 or 8 points over Kelly Ward in that primary. But what happened is that maybe got skittish, not sure, but they ended up hugging on Trump, which is great. She ended up winning by 24 points. Absolutely blew Ward and Arpaio out of the water. However, you can't really gravitate away once you hug Trump because those Trumpian voters, they're incredibly big on loyalty. So she never landed up moving back to the middle, and that really cost her, as you can see. So this one, I try not to get too wonky in here, and so, but this is one where it's a lighter tone version of, so where are those losses at? So on the left side, that x-axis, you see that, where Ducey overperformed compared to McSally. And these are just kind of some of the precincts laid out, but I only put the precincts on there where turnout was higher than 2016. So the turnout in these districts were actually higher than a presidential. And that shouldn't be that case, but again, people were fired up this election. And so when you look at this, you have on the y-axis is where McCain did better, right? So the bulk of those folks were those moderate voters, those center-right voters that typically were those blue dog Democrats that typically were electing them. And so you see that that was the bulk of it. However, there's this other thing is that where Trump did better. So these very Trumpian, so you have those kind of clusters in the top right. So these are folks that voted heavy and hard for Donald Trump. But when it came to the U.S. Senate contest, they didn't vote for McSally. They landed up voting for Sinema. Why is that? It's funny. When you actually drill down, those precincts, almost all of them lie in congressional districts 5 and 8. And when you look even further, it's Sun City and Leisure World in East Valley, right? So that retirement community. So it's incredibly interesting to see that the messaging clearly was affecting what was Sinema primarily running on, or the PACs attacking McSally on the age tax. Well, these people, Trumpian, loyal Republicans, typically vote that way. However, when it came to their need to medical and live, most likely, is that they went through partisanship and voted the other way. So when you take in losing those moderates, losing then, of course, some of those hardcore base, it's really hard to find a path to victory, even though in a midterm election incredibly favors Republicans. So those are some of the things that I saw. And so why are the surge of new voters? I mean, that's really the question most can't answer right now. And I think everyone has different theories on it, and I'm gonna go with my personal opinion. So again, others will have different ones. And I think it's frankly from the change in how politics is. I mean, before it was always ruled by whoever had the most amount of money. You had a main newspaper, you had a radio, and you had TV, and it was really that portion. But as you saw in the presidential last time, Jeb Bush, who had an incredible amount of money, Donald Trump had next to none, but again, earned media through social media. Trump landed up getting far more money expenditures when you look at it that lens, and that's what's changing is that money is less pushing politics worse. These social movements we're seeing far more because your friends that are jumping on. We saw social movements just in Arizona, Red for Ed, really pushed the education initiatives, but also Me Too, March for Our Lives, the Kavanaugh confirmation, which kind of got conservatives fired up because Republicans were fired up all year. It wasn't until the Kavanaugh confirmation did they actually get more motivated than previously. And then also the terrible shootings that have been happening because it brings up what? Gun policy. Should we go? And then also, what we're seeing right now, the caravan issue, talking about immigration, our system, what's right, what's wrong. So again, I think we're seeing now is that the surge of new voters is due to us being far more interconnected, having more information, and being able to share, and that is what's increasing engagement out there. Because again, when they typically target campaigns, they'll target based on vote history, right? But however, those votes of people that are less engaged, however, especially like let's say you're a teacher, maybe you're probably not going to vote in a midterm, but again, all this Red for Ed movement, et cetera, they're getting a little more mobilized. You're seeing more of that engagement. So I think it is a great thing to see engagement, but also it's tough on polling because now you're changing who is coming out, so we want to know who's coming. So, but these are the trends that we're seeing in the elections. So predictions in 2020. This is a fun one. So this has been a lot of questions, like predictions anywhere from who is the governor going to name to fill John Kyle's seat? I think it's probably the most common one right now. And the answer to that, no one knows. Anyone that says they do, I'd be suspect just because, let's be honest, even with the John Kyle pick prior, he was one of the names in there, but no one actually knew he was going to get picked. And so they're very good at keeping it close to the chest. So it'll be interesting to see who they land up putting in there, because that seat will be up in 2020. So we are going to have another Senate election here in Arizona. And so I think some of the predictions too I think it's twofold. One is on the national level, who the Democrats are going to land up being as their nominee. I think the shoe is going to be on the other foot this year, because last time GOP had 16 candidates, all pretty strong candidates, and then the Democrats had 5, probably only 2 really viable. And so it was the more contentious. Now you're going to have an incumbent, but I think you're going to see a lot of people that really want to get a piece of Donald Trump from the other side. So I think it'll be interesting to see if Democrats who normally coalesce around a candidate, or do they have more of a contentious primary, and also who wins. Hillary's talked about running. Which if Hillary was the nominee, I think chances would be better for Trump and the GOP compared to the Democrats. Or if Beto O'Rourke, for example, out of Texas were the nominee, I think would be very interesting, because I think that would be a very tough spot for the GOP. And Democrats would be in a strong position. So that's one thing. Who the nominee is going to be will be incredibly indicative of what happens down ballot. But the second biggest thing, I think, is will Democrats here take away the lessons learned? The big lesson learned on running, how do you win statewide? How you don't win is what you do what David Garcia did, which, again, running to the far left on it. It may be, there's close to a blue wave this year. However, it's just Arizona is typically a very independent state. Remember, we're the home of Barry Goldwater Jr., home of Maverick John McCain. So when you look at Arizona, even in this type of environment, a liberal governor, that might be a stretch. But again, a very center governor, or center right, or center left even, has a way. So that roadmap of how to win as a Democrat statewide, I think they'd be very smart to heed the advice of Sinema. I frankly thought ran a fantastic campaign, really made no errors whatsoever, and went with their strategy, executed, and ended up winning the contest in a midterm nonetheless, which midterms are tough to win compared to general elections. So I think it will be interesting to see if they have those takeaways. And that's pretty much, and then who will be running? Who will be running for that Senate seat? I think that some of the notables out there is that Governor Jan Brewer, she retired. Her numbers are incredibly good here in Arizona. She could be one. Grant Woods, McCain's former chief of staff, has already made overtures and is exploring a run. And then we, of course, have others here in Arizona that could be running. So again, it's going to be exciting. I think we all need to decompress a little bit from this last election, but with this next year, we're going to have the presidential and all the fun that comes with it, plus another Senate contest. So those are kind of the things that I have and some of the predictions. But enough about me and some of this stuff talking. I want to hear from you all for questions. So basically, I would say in the Phoenix mayor's race that it's going to be incredibly low turnout. I think turnout's going to be roughly 23 to 24%. Remember, we saw in this election, what was it, 64% turnout? I mean, you're looking at in the city election, you're going to have roughly 24%. And even though Phoenix, being the 5th largest city in the country, it is insane how incredibly low the turnout is when you don't have a major election driving it. So I think
How about this? How many votes are going to decide that election?
How many votes? Again, I don't know right now, because again, it's going to come down to who they target and where that is right now. But I can't tell you the numbers because I'm conflicted. But
what's the conflict?
we have a client in the race, so we can't. No. Yeah, so well, just as the polling on that, so I think it's going to come down of getting those hardcore voters out, the folks that kind of vote every single time, because again, it's just going to be too hard to get out new voters. So it's really going to be who targets the best, because it is a very fine group of people you're going to be going after. So you're going to see a lot of direct mail, a lot of digital compared to broadcast. And I think money is going to be a big indicator, because a bulk of the voters, what I can say, the bulk of the voters are undecided in that race. So I frankly believe it is kind of anyone's ballgame. So it's who executes the best strategy. So the right message to the right people, and do they spend their money effectively, it will be the next mayor. Yes, ma'am.
Number one, thank you for addressing this. This is a fascinating subject that I think we all are interested in. One thing you did not cover is most of us don't think polling is fake.
Thank you.
But but many of us think that it all depends on how you write the question. So could you deal with the veracity of the question?
Correct, and that's one of the things you see. One of the issues I think we saw back in 2016 was there's a lot of issues with polling, like fly-by-night polling firms that were putting out, because of the 24-hour media cycle, these outlets, and there's a lot more media outlets than there used to be, so they're looking for content, and they don't always care about the rest. They just care about the top line or what that buzzy headline is going to be, whether or not it's accurate. And so I think they've found their lessons. And so when you look at this recent election, there's twofold. One is I think the media has done a far better job of vetting, like actually saying like, hey, can I see the question verbiage? Can you send me the crosstabs? And not just saying, oh, hey, here's this press release, and just take it on face value. So I think there's a great education and better awareness and vigilance on that end. But when it comes to everyone's different, and I think for myself, we partnered with ABC 15 in this election. We had no conflict in the race, so we had no dog in the fight. And our true goal was to be as accurate as possible. And I think when asking the question, it does not make sense to me if you're going to ask a question to get a predetermined answer. That doesn't make sense, because whether you're above or you're below, you want to know where you're at, where you can then see where you can improve, where your strengths are, and where your weaknesses are. And I think it's just frankly silly, but when asking it, it's just being as unbiased as possible when asking the question, and making sure, like for example, when you do the horse race test, I would always ask the ballot as voters read it, but you'll have other folks that left off the Green Party candidate, which you can't. In an incredibly close race like this, Green Party candidate is always going to get anywhere from 2, 3, 4% of the vote. So you have to have that in there, because if not, it will skew the results. So I think it's twofold in there, not only asking it of how voters, like how they would be deciding, but also making sure it's unbiased, rotating the questions, randomizing your sample, and all of that, I would say. Does that work? Yes, sir.
There are certain sites like 538 and others that look at lots of polls. Do they look at your poll, and if so, how do they weight your poll, and what bias do they give to your poll?
So when 538, so the modeling, which Nate Silver and them was probably God's gift to polling, because you have polling, but then you have predictive modeling, where they actually, most actually unaware, 538 doesn't do any polling. What they do is take the aggregates of the polls that are out there, and then also take in historical data to basically model out what the results are. So with 538, we are weighted, I think, we have a perfect record, so we are 100% on races called, which is great, but also I think we're only weighted of barely a point, I would say. So it's, with 538 is one, but you saw this last year, what was it, on the presidential election, they didn't do too hot. They actually did very bad, because again, it went back to good data in, good data out. There's a lot of polls that probably shouldn't have been in there, really skewed the results, so they really overhauled the modeling over there. So you're seeing, I think, the rise of data modeling is something really to watch, because polling is one aspect, but I don't think modeling is something really to look for what the future of polling is going to look like, or prediction.
What about APS, Tom Steyer, 127 legacy of that?
It's interesting. So you saw it come in, is that had an interesting impact on the election, because when they knew that there was no path to victory about a month or so out on that renewable energy initiative, basically what happened was that Steyer just got mad or whatever, ended up getting a bunch of money, and there was dumped money in outside spending. $2.5 million was spent in outside expenditures on the Secretary of State's race. Secretary of State's race, normally outside groups do not come in and spend for those types of races, typically congressionals or these larger ones, but they knew, since there was few money, you had Steve Gaynor running in that race, who was a rich guy that somehow made mad a far richer guy. And so that money spent ultimately landed up swinging, which was, I think, one of the closest races we saw on the statewide level. And so that's where the implications, I think what you're going to see is that that's going to come back, because I think one of the things they were a little mad about, and that's why they went after Attorney General Mark Brnovich, was they had issues with some of the ballot language. So I think that is not the last we've seen, and I think that we can probably expect them to make another run, but being vigilant of outside groups coming in spending and changing probably policy here in Arizona. So I think you're going to see that trend probably continue. Oh, I'm done. Sorry.
In recognition and appreciation for your participation in our program today, we've made a donation to the Salvation Army's Adult Rehabilitation Center, which is a 6-month inpatient program for drug and alcohol. Oh, wow. And anyway, thank you so much for being here. It was great having you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. We are going to be having a debate here at Phoenix Rotary 100 between the two mayoral candidates. January 27th is the date on that, so be sure and mark that on your calendar. Should be a great debate.